Hey everybody, Pete Griffin here, bassist for Zappa Play Zappa and Death Clock and my band Griffin Labs, amongst many, many other things. Here to show you the awesome new dual bass station preamp pedal from Providence pedals. It's a really, really cool, useful device that lets you either balance the tone and volume of two different basses, or it can be used as a separate EQ pedal for a single bass. So it's a really, really useful thing, and it sounds great, which is, of course, what we're going for here. So I'll show you some of the details of it right now. Okay, so I guess I'll start off by showing you how to use this pedal when you're just using one bass. A lot of times these days I play gigs where I'm not even bringing an amp and I'm not even using a backline. I'm just going directly into the house and either getting my tone through in-ear monitors or from a monitor. It's sort of the future of bass playing these days. And having a preamp like this with such a nice EQ on it really kind of helps that. It means that instead of lugging a giant amp, you lug this nice little lightweight pedal and you have all the tonal options you want right there. So, just taking a 77 Jazz with stock pickups and everything, plug it into the thing and start playing, and even flat sounds great to me. It definitely adds a little bit more warmth than if I had just plugged directly into the DI that I have going here. But then from there you can start messing with the knobs, and you know, that's a nice, decent jazz bass sound, but I kind of want a little more bottom end. So let's go with an extreme setting of the bass knob and try turning it up almost all the way here, just to hear what that sounds like. Really kind of nice, even for such an extreme setting on a bass knob. I'm not usually one for turning knobs to extreme settings on an amp or on a bass or on a preamp or anything like that, because I think you should, the sound should be in the bass and in your fingers. But for something like that, it's still kind of nice even at a higher setting, but then you just kind of dial it back and it gives you a little bit more bottom end presence and it sounds good. Next, I always have issues with students where they say, hey, I've got my amp up all the way and or I can't turn up anymore because the sound guy's going to yell at me, but I still can't hear a note I'm playing. So I always tell them, don't mess with the bass knob on your amp to try to hear yourself better. Mess with the mid-range knob, and that's really where you're going to find your own personal kind of sound, and you can mix it against the kick drum a little better, or some low keyboards, or some down-tuned guitars that might be getting in your way. You got to find that mid-range frequency where nobody else is, and then that's where you occupy, and that's how you can kind of stick out in the mix a little better. Where this pedal helps that is not only does it have a mid-range knob, it has a mid-range frequency selector. So if you want kind of more of an old school, low-mid kind of warm sound, you turn the mid-range frequency selector knob down and then turn the actual mid-range knob up. So once again, we'll go a little extreme just to hear it, but here's a lower mid kind of sound. So really kind of nice, kind of a Motown-y sort of thing, very thumpy and subby. I haven't touched the tone knob on the bass at all. It's still pretty much all the way up, but it takes off some of the high end just by putting in some of the low mid. So we just dial that back a little bit. But if you're looking for more of a modern tone, a little more of the higher mid-range, you just take that same mid-range frequency selector knob and turn it to the other side where it's more in the high mid-range, and this is what that sounds like. So a little more finger attack, a little more growl to it, a little kind of grindier tone. It's really kind of cool. That would be more for almost like a punk rock thing if I was going to play with a pick or anything, you know. kick sound to jump out a little more. So having that mid-frequency selector knob is a huge thing, rather than just having a mid-range knob locked at a certain frequency. It lets you find that particular frequency that you're looking for, that the bass will exist in, that nothing else is existing in. So we'll dial that back to a more kind of usable sound there. And then of course treble. A lot of people use treble to get a little more of the brightness on the tone, obviously. This bass has fairly dead strings right now, so if I wanted a little more kind of zing from the top end, I would just turn up the treble. Once again, let's try a slightly higher frequency, a slightly higher setting, just to hear what it sounds like. So once again, even at a higher setting, it's not harsh sounding, it's not too clicky, but it gives you more of that sort of string noise, a little more of the high end. That's what treble does. So once again, dial that back to a sort of more usable sound, and then just with a few tweaks of the knobs, I've got what I think is a pretty great jazz bass tone directly into the system here. So there you go. Now, when you're using this pedal with just one bass, what's really great about having the second channel is you can have a completely different setting ready to go right there at your foot. For me, I have issues where my fingerstyle tone is louder than my slap tone. So a lot of times I'll use an EQ pedal or a boost pedal or something like that just for when I switch to my thumb stuff, so that it pops out a little more and has a little better EQ. Here I can do that all right here, all in the same pedal that I'm using for my same basic tone. So it's already doing two things at once and taking the place of what would have been another pedal on my pedal board. Pretty cool. So figure out the volume of that, but then if you notice, it's a little bit quieter with me not touching anything. So if I take that same tone I've got here and turn up some bass and some mid, a little bit of treble, maybe a little more treble, put the mid-range knob a little higher, and then just add a little more volume, I hit the button, it has that little volume boost that I needed, but it also has the different EQ setting that I needed to get the slap stuff to jump out a little more on the high end to get the string noise against the fret, a little kind of more bottom end to make sure that I'm still rumbling some speakers and everything. So just with that, it's already taken the place of another pedal on my pedal board, which is pretty darn cool. You can also use it for a volume boost where it's just for solos, you know, where we can set it up to be exactly where the first channel is, you know, match them exactly, but then just have a little more volume on the second one. So say you're just playing a bass line. And then suddenly it's solo time. And then back. So, having that extra little volume boost helps you kind of jump out for your solo a little more, and it means you have to rely on the sound guy less, knowing your songs and knowing that a bass solo is coming up, because a lot of times bass solos are short, and by the time the sound guy notices that you're soloing, it's already halfway done and he's got the slider up just for your last big riff. This way you kind of go, hey, I'm soloing, check it out. So it's useful for that too. There's also some cool stuff where you can do where you can almost use it as a special effect where you get sort of a lo-fi tone where you have your, once again, you have your main channel set up regularly, but then you do some extreme stuff on the second one where you can like maybe take out some bass and have it be a little more kind of you know, telephone voice sort of thing. So here's the regular sound, and then here's the second channel. So just by taking out the bass, yes, it's not the greatest bass tone, but if that's what a certain part of your song calls for, it's kind of cool to have that option. You can also, then have it be a little more in the low mids and crank that, and then less treble. Or just treble and bass and no mid-range, which also just takes out what's kind of interesting about cutting it in the same way that when it boosts the mid-range, it only boosts the frequency that you're talking about. So if there is a certain kind of low rumbling in that you want to get rid of, you kind of set it to find that particular lower frequency that you want to get rid of, and then you take it out like that. And so that gives you more of that kind of scooped EQ where there's a big bump on the bottom and a big bump on the top, but not really in the mid-range. Also a very usable tone, and also all just within one pedal. Pretty darn cool. Okay, so now we're going to talk about using this pedal with having two basses and how useful it is in those situations. What's really great is it has two separate inputs. It also has a tuner out, so you can have it running to a tuner the whole time, which is a trick I use when I'm playing fretless, where I basically leave my tuner on always, and on some of the longer notes I'll cheat and I'll look down and make sure I'm in tune, rather than just having the tuner on when you're bypassing the signal. It's kind of a nice bonus. Or you can also notice, even on a fretted instrument, if the string has gone out of tune, you can check by having your tuner on all the time. So big bonus of having just a dedicated tuner out. So what we're going to try to do now is where this is really helpful is balancing the levels and tones of two different basses. Here we have, like I said, a 77 passive jazz bass, kind of low output, really not all that much. When I've been using this pedal, I've had to give it a little goose in the volume area just to kind of get it up to a decent signal. But then, if I switch to the other bass that I have sitting here, which is a heavily modified P bass with EMG pickups and active, and it is suddenly way louder. So the only way I have to balance that is if I have a separate volume knob for it, rather than having to go up to the amp and hit the pad switch when you're switching to an active bass. Some amps have a different input for passive and active. You don't want to have to suddenly switch that in the middle of a gig just because you're switching just because you're switching basses. So you just switch channels and you set the volume on the second one a little bit lower. That still might be actually a little bit hotter than the last one, so I'll turn it down a little bit more. Because it's active pickups, it's a little more thumpy on the bottom, so you notice I don't have to have as much bass. These strings are a little newer, so if I was going to be trying to match the tones a little more, I could roll off the treble a little bit, and maybe even roll off some of the high mids. And so once again, not only do you have two great sounding preamp setups for two different basses, you're also once again helping your front of house guy who might not notice that you switched basses and hasn't adjusted your volume level, because now you did it for him. He doesn't have to worry about which bass you're playing on which song or anything like that. You hit the pedal, you make sure that the two volumes are balanced, and you're ready to go. So it's a really, really useful thing for gigs where you're playing two different basses, especially if they have two different tunings. If one goes lower than the other, you want to kind of re-EQ it to set up for that. These are two different pickup styles. The obvious one is going from an active to a passive bass or vice versa. You have all these extra options here to help you kind of balance everything out, and it really is useful and helpful in a lot of ways. Plus, they all sound great. Within just a little bit of tweaking, you can find the exact tone that you're looking for whatever kind of bass you're using. So I highly recommend the pedal. You should check it out. So now we're just going going to go into how the mid-range frequency knob works. It goes from 150 hertz to 1K, so it's pretty wide sweep. So you can really kind of mess around with it and find your specific thing in here. So I'm going to play it while a magical hand twists the mid-range knob, and you can hear all the different frequencies. It almost sounds like a wah pedal, which is kind of cool. So check it out. So you can hear from that even at an extreme mid-range setting, you can kind of find what that frequency is that you need to occupy in that mid-range area. Once again, very, very, very useful and very musical. Like, none of these settings are so extreme that I would never use them. I can see a possible usage for pretty much everything I've shown you so far. So that's always a bonus. Like, yes, it's nice that pedals can do extreme things, but if you're never going to use it, what's the point? So a pedal like this is, I keep coming back to the word useful, because not only would it replace other pedals on my pedal board, but it sounds really good for everything it does. So that's once again a big bonus of having such high quality components in it. And even though it's not necessarily a handmade pedal, I think this is better off because you're not getting something that might not sound like the one that they made before it. They've really nailed it with the parts that they've used and inside the pedal as well as on top of it and the whole idea behind it. Another quickie little feature that this has is, it seems pretty normal, but it has a nice dedicated mute switch, which is nice and clean. There's no pop, there's no hiss or anything like that. It's totally off when it's off, which is kind of nice. Seems like a pretty basic thing, but what's kind of a bonus about that is if you use a tuner pedal and you usually use that as your mute switch, now you can use this as your mute switch and either run the tuner out of the pedal itself or before the pedal or anything and leave it on all the time and run the pedal through the bypass so that you don't have to only be switching it on and off to be tuning. It can be tuning the whole time. Which, like I mentioned before, is a big bonus if you're playing fretless or if you're bending a lot of notes or if your strings have a tendency to go out of tune. It's really kind of nice to be able to have your tuner on all the time. So having a dedicated mute switch on a different pedal really kind of makes that possible. And this is a perfectly good one. Another thing to notice about this pedal is just the high quality of the components in it. It's 24 volts, which means it's got a little extra power hitting it than your average pedal, which also means that this volume knob, actually, you can crank it and there's no extra noise. There's no extra distortion. There's no extra hiss as you turn it up or anything like that. It still sounds great. It's just going to be louder. So it's really killer. Once again, if you're using it in replacement of an amp, and the sound guy needs you to send him more signal, him or her, you have plenty of room to do so without distorting anything, without adding extra noise, without getting hissy, without kind of anything like that. So it's really kind of a bonus that this thing is so well made. The extra components kind of, not only does it make your bass sound better, it doesn't add anything that you don't want into the sound, like hiss or hum or some extra buzz or anything like that. So it's really a bonus thing. So head on over to providence-ltd.com and check it out. It's a killer pedal.